Picture this. A crow is sitting on a fence post outside a research facility in Japan. It is watching traffic. Specifically, it is watching the intersection below. The traffic light cycle, the movement of cars, the brief windows when pedestrians cross, and the road surface is accessible without getting flattened. It has a walnut in its beak, a hard-shelled walnut that the crow cannot crack with its beak alone, because walnut shells are harder than crow beak force can manage without assistance. The light changes. The crow drops the walnut in the path of the oncoming traffic, flies back to the fence post, and waits. Cars drive over the walnut. The shell cracks. The light changes again. The crow flies down with the pedestrians, retrieves the walnut meat from the cracked shell, and eats it while waiting for the next cycle. The crow invented a car-powered nutcracker. On its own. Without being taught. Without a research grant. Without several years of postgraduate education in mechanical engineering. A bird with a brain the size of a walnut, which is perhaps the most pointed irony in the entire field of animal cognition, figured out that cars are heavy, roads are flat, traffic lights create predictable safe windows, and the combination of all three factors could be recruited to solve a specific mechanical problem that its own body could not solve alone. Now here is the question worth sitting with. Is that smarter than you? And the answer, which is more interesting than a simple yes or no, is that it depends enormously on what you mean by smarter, what cognitive domain you are measuring, and whether you are willing to accept that intelligence is not a single linear scale with humans at one end and everything else arranged below them in decreasing order of merit. Because the more carefully you examine what specific animals can actually do, not in the abstract, not in comparison to human standards, but in the specific cognitive domains where they have been pushed and tested and observed, the more the human at the top model starts to look like the intellectual equivalent of judging every athlete by how well they play basketball. So here is the full honest examination. Which animals are smarter than humans in specific, documentable, well-researched ways? What does their cognitive capability actually consist of? How was it discovered, and what does understanding it properly reveal about what intelligence actually is, and why assuming humans have a monopoly on it might be one of the more parochial ideas our species has ever entertained? Start with the crow, because the walnut story is not an anecdote. It is a representative sample of a body of research on Corvid cognition that has fundamentally altered how scientists think about the relationship between brain size, brain structure, and cognitive capability. New Caledonian crows manufacture tools. Not use tools in the way a chimpanzee uses a stick to probe a termite mound. Manufacture them with specific design choices, modifying raw materials into objects with specific properties that the crow has determined in advance will be useful for a specific task. The crow selects a specific leaf type, cuts it to a specific shape, and uses the result to extract insects from holes the crow's beak cannot reach. When researchers alter the tool-making materials available, crows modify their manufacturing approach accordingly, rather than abandoning the task. The future planning dimension of crow cognition is where the comparison to human intelligence becomes most pointed. In experiments testing whether animals can plan for future states rather than simply responding to current needs, crows have demonstrated an ability to select and cache tools they will need later, transport those tools to locations where they will be needed at a future time, and remember both the location of cached items and the relative perishability of different food types cached at different locations, retrieving perishable items first on a schedule that matches their spoilage rate. Planning for a future self with different needs than the current self requires what researchers call episodic memory and mental time travel. The cognitive capacity to project oneself into a future scenario and act in the present based on that projection. This was long considered a uniquely human capability. Corvids have it. The mirror test, the self-recognition test that involves placing a mark on an animal's body that is only visible in a mirror and observing whether the animal investigates the mark on their own body when shown their reflection, has been used as a proxy for self-awareness in animal cognition research. Magpies, members of the Corvid family, pass the mirror test. They investigate the mark on their own bodies when shown their reflection, demonstrating that they recognize the reflection as themselves rather than as another magpie. The only non-human animals that reliably pass the mirror test are great apes, dolphins, elephants, and corvids. The corvid entry on that list has a brain structured entirely differently from the mammalian brains of the others on it. Corvids achieve equivalent cognitive outputs through a neurological architecture that took a completely different evolutionary path, which is itself deeply informative about the relationship between cognitive capability and specific brain structure. Move to octopuses, because octopuses represent the most dramatic case in the entire animal cognition literature for the proposition that intelligence can emerge from biological substrates radically different from the vertebrate brain. The octopus nervous system is distributed. Approximately two-thirds of an octopus's neurons are not in the central brain, but in the arms themselves, each of which can process sensory information and execute motor responses semi-independently. The octopus is, in a meaningful neurological sense, not a single centralized intelligence, but a coordinated distributed system of semi-autonomous processing units. And what this system produces in terms of behavior is remarkable. Octopuses escape from closed containers by finding the opening mechanism through trial and error problem solving rather than random searching, suggesting they form a goal representation and systematically test solutions against it. They carry coconut shell halves across the seafloor for later use as portable shelters, collecting, transporting, and deploying tools in a context that separates the collection from the use by time and space. They recognize and remember individual human faces over extended periods, responding differently to specific people who have handled them in different ways. A cognitive capability that requires not just face recognition, but the association of specific faces with specific experiential memories. They play. Octopuses in captivity have been documented engaging in apparently non-functional exploratory behavior with novel objects that serves no immediate survival purpose. And that resembles play in the way researchers and animal keepers describe the term. The lifespan of an octopus is typically 1 to 2 years. All of the cognitive capability described above develops within that extremely compressed timeline, which means octopus intelligence develops faster than any comparable capability in any long-lived species. An octopus that hatches, grows, learns, solves problems, and dies. Within 18 months is achieving cognitive outputs that took mammals with decades-long developmental periods to reach through different neurological pathways. This suggests that the specific cognitive capabilities octopuses demonstrate are achievable through multiple evolutionary routes and do not require the long developmental period that vertebrate intelligence typically involves. Dolphins present a case where the depth of cognitive capability has been extensively researched and where specific domains of dolphin intelligence exceed human performance in ways that are straightforward to document. Dolphin echolocation, the biosonar system that allows dolphins to build detailed acoustic images of their environment. Processes information about object density, size, shape, and interior composition at resolutions that no human-built sonar technology has matched at equivalent scales. A dolphin can detect a golf ball at 30 meters in murky water and determine its internal composition from the acoustic return. The cognitive processing required to interpret three-dimensional echolocation data in real time while navigating, hunting, and maintaining social awareness of group members exceeds what any current human cognitive or computational system achieves in the equivalent domain. Dolphin syntax comprehension, the ability to process the grammatical structure of novel sentences in an artificial language system rather than simply associating specific signals with specific responses, has been demonstrated in research programs using underwater keyboards and gestural languages. Dolphins that have been taught an artificial language can understand novel sentences constructed from familiar vocabulary according to grammatical rules, responding correctly to instructions they have never encountered before by parsing the grammatical structure of the sentence rather than retrieving a memorized association. The ability to extract meaning from grammatical structure rather than from direct signal meaning association approaches the linguistic processing that language researchers once considered uniquely human. Dolphin social cognition is another domain where the comparison to human capability becomes challenging to summarize with human at the top confidence. Dolphin societies maintain complex, multi-level social structures with stable, long-term alliances between individuals who maintain these relationships through social strategies that include alliance building, coalition formation, and reputation management across timescales of years. Male bottlenose dolphins form alliances that operate at multiple tiers, pairs or trios that cooperate directly, and super alliances between multiple smaller alliances that coordinate during competitive encounters with rival groups. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Maintaining and navigating multi-tier alliance structures requires tracking the relationships, reputations, and current status of many individuals simultaneously. A social cognitive demand that researchers compare to the complexity of human social environments. Elephants present a case where specific cognitive capabilities exceed human performance in domains that are directly comparable and where the underlying neural basis of those capabilities reflects evolutionary investment in specific cognitive systems that human brains have not prioritized equivalently. Elephant memory, particularly spatial and social memory, operates at scales and resolutions that exceed human equivalents in documented ways. Matriarch elephants in long-studied wild populations have been documented responding appropriately to threats from specific human groups encountered years or decades previously, maintaining detailed social memories of individuals, locations, and events across timescales that exceed what human memory reliably achieves for equivalent categories of information. Elephant empathy and social cognition represents another domain of capability that has been extensively documented, and that challenges comfortable assumptions about the distribution of social intelligence across species. Elephants assist injured group members in ways that require assessing another individual's physical state, understanding what kind of assistance is needed, and providing that assistance, behavior that requires perspective taking and other-oriented cognition. They respond to the deaths of group members with behaviors that include returning to death sites, handling the remains of deceased individuals, and prolonged apparent grieving responses that reflect social bonds of a depth and duration that no researcher who has observed them closely characterizes as simple instinct. Elephants also demonstrate the mirror self-recognition that was mentioned in the crow discussion, passing the mirror test and thereby joining the short list of species where this specific form of self-awareness has been documented. The convergent evolution of self-recognition across species as biologically different as corvids, cetaceans, elephants, and great apes suggests that this cognitive capability emerges independently from multiple evolutionary trajectories when the social complexity of the environment creates sufficient selection pressure for it. Chimpanzees present the most direct comparison to human cognitive capability, and the one where specific performance superiority in defined tasks is most clearly documented. Atsushi Matsuzawa at the Primate Research Institute in Kyoto conducted research with a chimpanzee named Ai, and subsequently with Ai's son Ayumu, that produced results that made human cognitive scientists visibly uncomfortable. In a specific task measuring working memory for the positions of numerical digits displayed briefly on a screen, Ayumu the chimpanzee performed substantially better than human subjects, including human memory champions who have trained specifically on this task. Ayumu can view a random arrangement of the numbers 1 through 9 displayed on a screen for a fraction of a second, and then correctly identify the position of each number by touching the screen in numerical order, a performance that humans cannot match at equivalent exposure durations. The specific cognitive capability underlying this performance is a form of eidetic or photographic working memory that human cognitive evolution appears to have traded away. The hypothesis that most researchers in this area find plausible is that as human language and sequential reasoning capabilities expanded, The specific form of visual working memory that chimpanzees retain was deprioritized in human cognitive architecture. The neural resources that support it were recruited for other functions. Chimpanzees retained the capability that humans lost, in a direct trade that made us better at some things and worse at this specific thing. The chimpanzee memory performance is not a quirk or an outlier. It is a documented, replicated finding that human subjects cannot match at equivalent task parameters. Bees present perhaps the most striking case where the cognitive outputs of a nervous system radically simpler than any vertebrate brain produce results that require researchers to repeatedly revise what they thought was possible in a system of that scale. Honeybee colony decision-making about nest sites involves a distributed consensus process in which hundreds of scout bees independently assess potential nest sites according to multiple quality criteria, return to the swarm, and communicate their assessments through waggle dances whose intensity reflects the quality of the site found. The colony integrates these independent assessments across a population of scouts, filters out lower quality options through a process that resembles inhibition signaling, and reaches a consensus decision that consistently selects the highest quality available site from the options the scouts found. This is collective intelligence, a decision-making process distributed across hundreds of individuals that consistently outperforms what any individual member of the group could achieve, operating in an insect whose individual brain contains approximately 1 million neurons compared to the human brain's 86 billion. The bee colony is doing distributed consensus decision-making more reliably than most human committees, in a system that uses a tiny fraction of the neural resources that human individual cognition requires. The efficiency of bee collective intelligence relative to its neural substrate is extraordinary. Individual bees demonstrate additional cognitive capabilities that continue to surprise researchers. Bees learn to solve problems by watching other bees, social learning that transfers specific techniques rather than general tendencies. Bees show pessimistic cognitive bias after stressful experiences. Their assessment of ambiguous stimuli shifts toward negative interpretations in ways that parallel the cognitive effects of stress on human judgment, suggesting that the neural mechanisms underlying mood-like states and their effects on cognition may be far more broadly distributed across animal nervous systems than was previously assumed. Rats are in this accounting because rat spatial cognition and the neural mechanisms underlying it have been studied in more detail than perhaps any other cognitive system in any animal, and what that research has revealed about how rats represent and navigate space exceeds what most people would predict from a rodent. Rats maintain a cognitive map of their environment, a spatial representation that is not a simple stimulus-response chain, but a flexible, abstract representation that allows novel route planning and shortcuts that were not directly experienced during learning. The specific neural implementation of this spatial cognition in place cells, grid cells, and related neuronal populations in the hippocampus was first characterized in rats and subsequently found in humans and other species, meaning that rat spatial cognition research produced the foundational understanding of how mammalian spatial memory works. Rats also demonstrate empathy in documented ways. In experimental settings, rats will take action to release other rats from restraint, even when the restrained rat is a stranger, and will share food with rats that have helped them previously. The rat helping a restrained stranger rat when the helping rat receives no direct benefit is performing other-oriented behavior that produces results resembling human compassionate response, in a nervous system that most people would not reach for as their first example of empathy in the animal kingdom. The honest conclusion of examining all of this is that the question in the title, which animals are smarter than us, is both answerable and importantly misleading as a framing. In specific defined cognitive domains, crows plan for the future more reliably than most humans manage to. Chimpanzees have working memory for visual information that humans cannot match. Dolphins process acoustic spatial information at resolutions humans cannot achieve. Bees make collective decisions more efficiently than most human organizations. Octopuses solve novel problems at speeds that make their brief lifespans even more remarkable. Elephants maintain social and spatial memories across timescales that human memory cannot reliably sustain. In those specific domains, those specific animals are smarter. But the framing of smarter than us implies a general hierarchy that the evidence does not support. Human cognitive capability in language, in abstract reasoning, in the specific form of cumulative cultural transmission that allows knowledge to compound across generations. These are capabilities that no other species has matched and that have produced outcomes on the planet's surface that reflect that advantage clearly. The issue is not that humans are not intelligent or that human intelligence is not remarkable. The issue is the assumption that intelligence is a single thing of which humans have the most, rather than a collection of different capabilities distributed across species in patterns that reflect their specific evolutionary histories and ecological demands. Every animal on this list is smarter than humans at something. Every animal on this list also lacks capabilities that humans have. The crow cannot write a novel. The dolphin cannot build a telescope. The chimpanzee cannot maintain the kind of institutional knowledge across generations that produced the device you are watching this on. These are real differences, and they matter. But the walnut on the road, cracked by traffic that the crow recruited to solve a problem the crow identified, is also real. And sitting with both of those things simultaneously, the extraordinary breadth of human capability alongside the specific domains where other animals do things we cannot, is a more accurate and more interesting relationship with animal intelligence than the comfortable hierarchy most people carry without examining it.